Hey, everybody. How are you? Hope you are doing well. I'm wearing this t-shirt, Hope, for a reason. As we talk about exiting well and maximizing value, that doesn't necessarily mean you got to leave the company. You can always recapitalize, but hope is not necessarily the strategy that you're going to need to get you there. Hope is what gets us out of bed every morning. It's what gave you the fuel to launch your company, but it's not a strategy to just lean on that if you want to exit well. So as you guys are ramping on here, if you would use the Q&A to raise questions, and you can harass us on the chat. We've got the ever talented Jack Santaniello still coming on here. We've got a new stunt double for Adam Boatsman because Adam just got in from Greece early this morning. So John will be our resident guru for tax strategies, especially as you're thinking about transitioning or exiting, whether it be internally or externally, et cetera, or even if you're acquiring. So there's some good things there. And man, Jack, you've got a collared shirt. You're looking really good. So does John McCarty. All right.
Jack, trying to brighten it up a little bit.
Yeah, that's really good. I mean, it's kind of South Beach seafoam green, man. I like it.
Yeah.
Good. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And last week was really good. I thought we had plenty of questions kind of peppered in throughout. And we really do not want this to be a monologue where we're just spewing information. We've got some good stories and we actually have some good insights, I think. But nonetheless, please hit us with questions. And when you do, I'll make sure that I'm thank goodness. Thanks, Joe. I knew I could count on you, Joe. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and share a screen and we'll get this thing moving here. If I can move my, all right, come on. Now I need to be able to, oh gosh, I've got my sharing controls that are right in the freaking way. There we go. Now we good. All right, come on, hit us with this slideshow. All right, here we go. Now I've got controls out of the way and I can actually move my stuff. So, all right, well, you know, those are supposed to be gold nuggets, but they could also be chocolate covered or chocolate eggs that just have gold. And I've seen people that have exited thinking they were going to get a handful of gold and they really pretty much got a handful of chocolate eggs. So hopefully we're going to try to keep you guys from having that happen. So, all right. I know, Jack, you've got a slide here. We're going to cover 7 stages and 7 critical questions that are kind of important as you're thinking of exiting. So, you know, Jack, this is your slide.
Yeah. So so everyone's kind of clear that, and we're kind of on the same page. This is kind of how I look at the business cycle. And, you know, when clients come to me and say, all right, this is kind of what, you know, we have going on, where do they fit in? And obviously, you know, we're talking about more towards the back end, which is the exit. But what's interesting is, and I said this, I think we showed this last week, the slide, but that, you know, each stage is lengthy in a sense that, you know, when you're established and then, you know, you have, it's kind of like horizontal and then somewhat diagonal, horizontal, diagonal. And so I think that some people do not read themselves correctly in some instances, that they believe that maybe they are mature or maybe they believe they are established and, you know, they're ready for expansion or they're ready for exit. So this is just kind of just to put everyone kind of in the right frame of mind as to, you know, the different areas as to the life cycle of a business. And so, you know, my first general question before we get to kind of the stages here is, you know, this is more rhetorical, but in exit strategy, what's the most important piece in the exit strategy? And so I'm going to answer my own question, which is it's you, the business owner, that is the most important part. And while the exit strategy is you are your own worst enemy and your own best friend, essentially. And we'll talk about that more as we go through this, as to some of maybe the bottlenecks and stuff, as to your importance in the business and that kind of thing. So I look at it as you are a benefit and you are a burden to this process, and I say that with all the love in the world as an advisor. So anyway, those are my initial 2 cents.
All right, so we're going to go off the rails immediately with an ERTC question, and then we'll get back into exiting. Okay, good, Joe. We'll get to that too right next. But this first question is, hey, Jack, we're looking back to 2020 to capture ERTC, so ERC tax credit. Unfortunately, 2020 PPP was forgiven using 100% of payroll. I think we should simply say that the payroll accounts for 60% of the PPP forgiveness, but do you know yet how the IRS will determine the amount of payroll used for PPP? Jack or John, you can weigh in on this too.
Well, I can weigh in, to be honest with everyone, to say I don't know the answer to that. Being a general practitioner who has specializations in certain areas, and payroll tax is not one of them. And on top of that, the PPP is all very new. That said, our BGW has several people on hand who have really dedicated the last year and a half of their life to this. And, so we don't have to know the answers to everything, but we need to be able to go find the answers to everything. And we can definitely give you some feedback on this one, but I can't answer the question right off the cuff.
Jack, you got any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, so normally I would punt to the CPAs and to Adam, but so here is, and I think that I see that it's an anonymous attendee, but if that person wants to reach out to Gary directly, then John can answer that question or find the answer. But from my perspective, my understanding is that because of the that they're mutually exclusive in many cases, that but yes, you obviously can't use both of them together, and you have to make choices. And that's why we've said, Adam has said in the past, that you really need to make sure that you understand, that your CPAs understand the interconnectivity between the PPP and the ERTC, or the ERC credit, ERTC, and that because you could shoot yourself in the foot if it isn't done properly. So, but I don't know the direct question how the IRS will determine the amount of payroll used for PPP. I am not personally aware of that, nor have I seen anything that says that, but I haven't really, quite honestly, I haven't been looking for that, because that's really a tax issue, not a legal issue. So I am also punting, but giving you my best educated guess. So there you go.
So I'm going to channel my inner Adam Boatsman, and my gut would be, if you used and you applied using 100% of your payroll and you got forgiveness, and you're going to try to make excuses before the judge, you're going to have a tough time arguing that, because that sounds like that is messing with the line. So again, that's my Adam theory, but I would be really worried about that one. But we can get that confirmed. Whomever this is, you can send me an email, gfrey@trustbgw.com, and I will get a definitive answer from one of our PPP gurus.
Yeah, and I just wanted to also say one of the reasons why I'm punting too is that when we talk about, there's periods of time that are reported. So it's if you reported one period of time, but you have an additional period of time to report, you may be able to do both. But yeah, you can't use I mean, the point is that you can't use the same period of time and the same payroll subsidy for both, essentially, is the way it works.
All right, before we get into the next slide, Papa Joe is on here early. So I've heard a variety of valuation formulas that use X times EBITDA, depending on total revenues of the company. Do you care to speak to this?
So I would say I have seen that, but again, I'm not familiar enough to be able to say that that is the case. I mean, it makes sense that you're looking at earnings in a sense that because then you're having, you're dealing with certain costs that are already extracted from that. So it is formulaic, and I think that the federal government is still, even if they were to say and provide guidelines, that may change over the course of time. And I'll give you just a totally tangential example of, so for those of you that are in the restaurant business or concessionaires, there was a court case that came out yesterday. Actually, the court case is still going on, but there was an injunction. Remember when we were talking about weeks ago that with the Restaurant Revitalization Fund, that for a 2-week period, minority owners, and that is race, but also gender, so women, were given a head start, a 2-week head start in the rat race of applying for and receiving funds. That's been overturned as being discriminatory. And my understanding is 2 white males said, well, wait a minute, that's not fair. Why did they get an advantage over us? Because it's not a matter of discrimination of businesses. It is just an issue of businesses need money, and why should they get a head start? I'm not going to get into the reasons for or against and historical, not just past historical, but in the past year of PPP money, about who got what and who didn't get what. My point is that the rules change, and then they get the interpretation of the rules come later down the road. So for example, when we talked about maybe a month ago, what does the litigation, what does the legal front look like? That there's a lot to come with respect to PPP, ERTC, and to the Restaurant Revitalization Fund. So sorry, I didn't mean to go off on a tangent, but my point is that things change, and you just need to be on top of them.
And just as a reminder, while we are talking about ERTC, before we move on back to the regularly scheduled program, but you got 3 years to apply. And so unless, our position has been, unless you need the money now, you might want to cool your jets just a little bit, because we saw this with PPP, and Jack just gave a great example of that. So anyway, and we may talk a little bit more about that again next week. Adam and I have a little powwow scheduled to talk a little bit more about that, but nonetheless. So the other thing that I would say to Joe is, I believe we have a couple folks from Viking Mergers and Acquisitions on the line as well that are attending this thing. So if you guys have anything that you want to shout out regarding EBITDA and multiples and that kind of stuff, that'd be great. So next one. So there are 7 questions that we have, and you've probably had this question hit many times, especially from insurance people, but it goes beyond that. So what happens if you get hit by a bus? And the central question for that is, if something happens, or, all of a sudden you're taken out, and we all have plenty of stories where that has happened. Do you have in writing? Do you have a plan? Do you have your insurance to cover? Are all parties responsible? Your CFO, your COO, et cetera, do they know what their battle stations are to be? It's interesting. I'll use a quick example. A year ago, Jeff Wolfberg, who is a coach and he has some kind of peer-to-peer roundtables, he calls them advisory boards, where typically smaller businesses and business owners are part of it. And he was pushing hard on succession planning. And one of the guys was dutiful about doing that. He didn't just rely on hope as a strategy. He actually did something about it. And these are typically 5-year plans that you need to get. You cannot just ingest the elephant one bite at, in one fell swoop. You've got to take bites against this plan. Well, this guy had done it. And if I'm not mistaken, right, he had a massive heart attack at like 46, died, but he had his plan. His wife knew his plan, his team, and they had been acquiring a bunch of companies, and Jeff was his takeover guy. He hoped, who would have thought at 46 or whatever it was that he was, that this would have to go into place, but it did. And Wolfberg was able to go in, and they continued to grow. They continued to grow last year. This happened, I think, in December of 2019. So nonetheless, a well thought out plan in writing, not just in your head. Most people have the plan in their head, but nobody else knows about it. Well, if that's the case, it's not a plan. And so what's interesting about this is, like, hey, and this is a study from like 3 years ago, but 67% of business owners had no plan at all, and 90% of them had a little bit of a plan or no plan, but it really wasn't communicated. So think about that. They'd spent less than 1 year on it. So, the good news is, if that's you, you're not alone. The bad news is you might want to get moving. And this isn't to shame anybody. I mean, listen, when you're fighting through COVID, we get it. You're in survival mode. But it's kind of like anything else. You whether it be exercise or anything, it doesn't consume all of your day. It just needs to be a routine part of every day. So anything that you'd add to that one, Jack? You got any war stories that are worth mentioning?
Oh, I have plenty of war stories. And what's interesting is, what if you get hit by a bus? I used that within the past hour. And the reason why I was like, right at the 11th hour, 10:59, was because I was on a conference. We were doing a walkthrough of an operating agreement with some clients. And, it's interesting. There's certain dynamics within a company. I'm going to go off for a second, and we're going to talk about, options. But, my suggestion was that it was a core group of 3 owners, 2 majority owners, a minority owner, and then another minority owner, which was external to the core company. And they said, hey, let's all get on the phone and talk about this stuff. And like, now our group is going to talk about it first, and then we're going to bring this other 10% owner into the discussion, because there are certain things that we need to talk about, like what happens when you get hit by a bus. And the way I discuss this is, well, first of all, it should be part of your governance documents. So for a corporation, there should be a shareholders agreement. For an LLC, there should be an operating agreement. And as we talked about last week, it's like the operating agreement is the combination of bylaws and a shareholders agreement. But in there, you have what happens under certain circumstances, and involuntary transfers or involuntary transfers. And so involuntary transfer, obviously death would be an involuntary transfer, right? And so things like, becoming disabled, or just getting to a point where, you want to move forward. So when we talk about, planning, it's not just, when bad things happen. It is, okay, down the road, what if I want to do something? What if one of my co-owners wants to sell? Shouldn't I have restrictions in an operating agreement that says, no, you can't, unless you first offer it to the other owners, you offer it to the business, and there are tax reasons why you would offer one to the business or to the owners. It deals with tax basis, et cetera. So, what does that mean? And then you get into the involuntary stuff. But and then involuntary, kind of 2 prongs, or two kind of thoughts. One is that when you have owners that build a foundation and then something happens to one of them, someone gets hit by a bus, that ownership goes to their beneficiary. It goes to the estate, which essentially would go to the beneficiaries if you follow the pattern of estate administration. So at that point, you have an option. Do you like your partner's spouse? And if you don't, then you probably should deal with that, because they may end up with that ownership interest potentially, at least the economic interest, and then they're in your business. The majority of time that I've seen, which is that it triggers a sale so that you treat the beneficiaries fairly. Maybe they get fair market value. Maybe they get a discount of fair market value because it's a minority interest. Then the company gets back that interest, and then the owners, the surviving owners, can move on with the business. The family, the beneficiary of the decedent owner, is taken care of fairly. Okay. And again, the opposite is that, well, let's say the three of us built this company. I get hit by a bus. I work really hard to build this company up. So I do want my wife and kids to get the benefit of Gary and John continuing the business. And hopefully they don't screw it up, and hopefully there's money. And their hope is that my wife really doesn't want to interfere with the business and just is happy to get a coupon payment every once in a while. So those are kind of the things. But it does, this chart doesn't surprise me, because a lot of times it is, well, my estate planning documents deal with this stuff, so why do I need to deal with it? Well, you want to have a contract that deals specifically with the business, its assets, its liabilities. I'm not suggesting the opposite or the converse or inverse of that, which is, do not use your operating agreement as your estate planning tool. You should have estate planning documents separate and apart, and obviously they should be in sync with each other. So again, this chart doesn't surprise me, because there's like, yeah, my estate planning documents cover it. Yeah, my lawyers draft this operating agreement, and I was told 5 years ago what happens if I get hit by a bus or whatever. So yeah, I'm good with it. But do you really understand? Another big issue with getting hit by a bus is, if you have insurance, is that at the time you get the insurance, your intention was to cover 80% of what that payment would be to that beneficiary. As time goes on, hopefully if things go well, the value of the company increases. Therefore, your proportionate share as an owner increases. And therefore, the insurance that was supposed to cover 80% now covers 70% of the amount that is due. So somewhere you have to come up with that extra 10%, or the entire 30%, obviously. But so things like that you need to be aware of. And I would suggest as a small free nugget of information, which is, as you go through each year and you're looking at your performance for the prior year, you're setting budgets for the next year, that is a good time to look at your insurance policies for key man insurance, for buy sells and things like that. So I'll stop there. And John, if you want to add in some commentary to all of that, or any of that.
You're already jumping ahead to question number 3.
Darn it.
Have you seen this?
Yeah, what's funny, I was trying to quietly pull up the slide deck so I wouldn't do exactly that, and I completely messed that up. So I'm sorry for messing up your flow.
Oh no, it's all good, man. I have seen somebody get hit by a bus at trade and almost Tryon, and that was terrifying. Fortunately, that person, I think, lived, but it was not pretty. So I hate that analogy, having seen and witnessed that very thing about 5 years ago. All right, next, come on. All right, so whether you're planning on leaving or you want to do more stuff versus just, you want to work on the business versus in the business, this is one of the most important things that we looked at when I was in private equity with the management team. Like, are all roads leading to that owner? Guess what? And Viking, you guys can hit me on the chat and confirm or deny this, but the more that this company is dependent upon that owner, the lower the value goes. It's kind of like concentration risk. If all of your, for all of your clients, 90% of them are tied up in one, you have concentration risk. It's the same thing on the owner. And, that whole spectrum is, hey, the company falls apart if you're not there. That means you're kind of the one-man band and everybody's supporting and clapping. To the other one is, I just show up because I got nothing else to do. Well, that's a good one. And I saw Brent on here, and Brent, shout out to you, because this is a guy that started a business and realized that he didn't want to do everything and couldn't do everything. And the last time you and I talked, Brent, you were spending about 10 hours a week in your business, and the rest of the time I think you were playing golf. And he loves doing that. So I just think that's really cool, and he's not old. So he has done a very, very good job of kind of removing all those roads going to them. And the other thing that I've seen with another company is, we did a function accountability chart with this particular management team. The CEO was super burned out. He had denied a couple of offers, unsolicited offers, to buy his company. But the issue was, he loved his people and he loved his culture, and he was afraid that was going to change. Well, guess what? It did. It would if somebody else came in. But the issue was, too many roads were leading to him. And when we did this function accountability chart, like, all right, so what are the main functions of this company that keep it going? And where does the road, who has the final authority and say so in each one of these things? I think his name was by 11 of the 14 at that point. This was like 3 years ago. We said, all right, well, what do you love to do? And he circled 3 things. And what was interesting is, in doing that, we were able to move certain functions away from him, because he was just wearing out, and he didn't feel like there was anybody else to give it to. They couldn't do it as well as he could, or whatever. And shortly, in less than 6 months, he was able to transition out of all of those things, except for the 3 things he loved to do. And that value of that company has skyrocketed, because they have over tripled their top line and improved their bottom line dramatically. So just think about that. That's, now he doesn't want to leave. But exit, again, just doesn't mean, well, I got to sell and go play golf, or, be on a beach somewhere. You could sell, you could take a minority interest, you could get some, recapitalize, you get some money off the table, or you could just spend more time doing other stuff besides working in the business and fighting fires all the time. So anyway, this is the question.
Before you go on to that, I just want to mention one thing. And yeah, this is a great question. And it's on both sides. The chart that we did, it's on both sides of the spectrum, on the growth side and then on kind of the tail end side. I tell a business owner who wants to franchise, my first question to them is, first of all, you're a control freak. If you're a control freak, you can't be a franchisor. Secondly, if you are indispensable to that business running, then you cannot franchise, because you cannot be in 5 places at once. And so you have to when you build a franchise model, you have to not be indispensable. You have to be able to put your knowledge into writing and put it into manuals, etc. In the context of succession planning, a lot of times you'll see that you have the seller is a consultant. I mean, sometimes that's a way of moving purchase price funds around, but in other cases, it is, really you need that person's expertise for the transition, et cetera. But if you've done it correctly, then your business, you are not indispensable to your business, because you build up the personnel and the processes and procedures that allow you to be able to sell your business or transition your business. Even if it's not a sale, even if it's a transition to key employees, or transition to your children as your successors, as your heirs. So just something to consider.
Okay. So first of all, Kevin Carlisle with Viking is on here, and he did answer my menu bar had changed. So I was like, how do I get to the chat? Well, I finally figured it out. So here was his answer to the question on EBITDA and multiples. So he said, at Viking, we see larger deals that are greater than 5 million will sell for a multiple of EBITDA. Below that level, they first calculate the seller's discretionary cash flow that reflects add backs to EBITDA, then apply a multiple specific to the industry that the business is in. Obviously, some industries have very low multiples, like service industries, like the accounting world, right? We have pretty low multiples. If you've got software as a service, man, that's like big money because you've just got recurring revenue and margins are super fat and that sort of thing. So anyway, thank you for jumping on that, Kevin. I really appreciate that. Also, and he did reconfirm that, you know, buyers want to see that the business is not so dependent on one owner that'll be exiting. So delegate, build your bench, document your key processes. And yeah, we're going to even actually get into that too. The next question, and so I raised it a little bit, and Joe, you know, it clanged the bell with him. Does anyone care to talk about the abundance of private equity money right now? So Kevin, I think you're still out there. What if you would hit me back in the chat and we'll address that in just a little bit. I just want to address this, the third question, which was, you know, life insurance value, who owns it, disability insurance value, operating agreement with buy sell. These are the things that Jack was intuitively jumping ahead to. And listen, neither Jack nor I nor John McCarty sell insurance. And guess what? We don't have any panelists on here that sell insurance. You know, we're not like teeing it up for them so they can go, you know, have a slam dunk home run. Nobody likes talking about it, but it is important because that is a huge part of, you know, what's going on and understanding, like what Jack said, hey, the value of the company has increased fivefold. Well, guess what? The insurance to cover that probably isn't enough. So, all right, let's see here.
With respect to disability insurance, I just, because this happens occasionally, which is similarly not a matching of what you have in your operating agreement as the definition of disabled or disability or total disability or partial disability. So you have an awesome insurance policy that has its own definition, and so it doesn't match. So while there is an obligation in the operating agreement upon a disability occurrence, it may not be covered by insurance because the definition in the insurance policy is different, and they will deny coverage because it's not disability in there. So and that means timing issues. So like if in the operating agreement says, you know, if after 180 days, you know, the person cannot provide services, then they're permanently disabled, which may be different than what the definition is in the insurance policy. So just make sure that that's another point of weakness between an operating agreement and providing essentially collateral for obligations in a buy-sell environment.
All right. And Bob, you've got a great question here, and I'm going to get to that. And I'm going to tee it up also for Jack and John. You know, you guys can weigh in, and same way with Kevin, if you're still out there, I'd like you to weigh in on this too. But the next question is company value. That's the next question that we're dealing with. And Bob asked the question, where are 90% of the multiples landing, 3 times to 7 times, or what are they? Well, yeah, I mean, I think it really does vary based on industry, but, and we could probably look at, well, what are the big industries that are moving right now? You know, I don't know if there are any trends that you're seeing out there, Kevin, or anybody else from Viking. Jack, are you seeing anything?
Yeah, so it is interesting, and it's industry specific. It is the type of transaction. So you're going to have a different value if you're selling to a true third party suitor versus maybe an internal purchase. So I'll give you an example. The value of this particular medical practice is significant, but the owners, our clients, are willing to sell to the current employees of the other doctors, essentially. So you have a core doctor group of owners willing to sell to the other doctors and eventually retire. They're older than the buyer group, and the value of the business is a little different. And so, it really depends. I think that values are changing with respect to what's happened over the past year, where some businesses that have been, and we use this, it seems like we use this word a lot, pivoting appropriately and successfully, and utilizing their technology, their processes, et cetera, seem to be increasing in value. Whereas maybe in a non-COVID environment where they didn't have to pivot and become innovative, their value is not necessarily, it would not be that high. So there's just a lot more variables that go into where you kind of fit into, the day for me, at least temporarily, if I were handicapping a business in a particular industry just based on my experience and the experience of my partners in this firm, it's going to be different in some instances because of what's happened over the past 12 months, both good and bad.
Something also to think about with, okay, so what do you need to retire, and how critical is the company value to that? And Brent, I was talking, about him, if I remember right, he's still in his 30s and he wants to retire, well before he's 50. So you have to think about those kind of things. And the other thing is, and John, I would love you to speak on this one if you're willing to. So, I know that we're putting John on the firing line here, but he did a really good job on PPP where he said, that isn't my expertise. So appreciate that. But company structure and how that company structure is, look, we talked about various company structures last week with Matt Anderson on here too, but that makes a huge difference on tax and taxability. And I've seen it where somebody thought they were going to get this monstrous payday, and then all of a sudden, because it wasn't structured in a tax efficient manner, they left with a whole lot less than they were anticipating. And then they started having cold feet, after the train was already way down the tracks, and they were bound by, certain obligations to, the tax man was taking a whole lot more. So John, anything that you can weigh in on that to help maximize that value?
Sure, be happy to. So with the first graph that we had up, it was the startup position, and that's where you make a lot of decisions that affect a lot of things at the tail end, quite honestly. So whether you decide to be a partnership, an S corporation, or a C corporation can make a big difference. So back to question 3, who owns the insurance? Well, if you have a C corporation and they own the insurance, well, then you still got to figure out a way to get it out to the owners. Also, so, and what you fall into there is double taxation. Those kind of fears are allayed once you get past a certain size, and you may become a target for private equity, where somebody really puts a strategic value on your ownership interest as opposed to a theoretical value or a discretionary cash flow value. So those things really matter. And so on the flip side, for a closely held business, there's going to be a time period, one, that you're going to hold the business. So you might have it for 5 to 15 years. And so you've got to manage your tax burden through all that piece. So if you go with the C Corp, you're subject to double taxation all the way along the way, and typically at the end as well. Whereas with a closely held business, when we have an LLC or an S Corp, a lot of the times we're able to build the case for personal goodwill, so that we don't have those 2 layers of taxation. We get long-term capital gains tax rates. So a lot of just to reiterate, a lot of the decisions you make on the front end as far as entity choice can affect what not only what the value placed on the business is, but the amount of cash you actually walk away with at the end of the day.
So here's another question that I see happen quite frequently, and that is, all right, so we started out as a partnership, or we started as an LLC, then we moved to somebody talked us into moving to a C Corp. Now we're going, oh gosh, the Biden tax plan has us worried about that. The way that we may want to exit at some point makes sense to go to an S Corp. You can change horses, but you have to have a period of time. I think it's 5 years that it has to be established in order to fully maximize that tax strategy. Is that accurate, John?
Yeah, so what you're referring to is the built-in gains tax specifically. So if you have been convinced to change to a C Corp, in the past, that was very punitive because of double taxation. We've started seeing it more in vogue recently with the lower tax rates. But again, with the way that tax rates, everyone, conventional wisdom, are going to be going up, and especially I think on C corporations. So if you've gone that C Corp route and you're planning to sell, perhaps you decide to make an S election. There's going to be a built-in gains tax on that, and as Gary alluded to, unless you hold that for a period of time. So if a mistake is done on the front end, it doesn't necessarily mean we can't have a good result on the back end. It just means we may have to take some more time in between. That said, I don't want to scare anybody away, because there's sometimes when the transition is seamless. So, if we don't have a lot of retained earnings in the C corporation, if we don't have a lot of established value yet, then the transition's easy. The longer you wait, the more expensive it gets. So,
all right, that's good. And back to Bob's question, Kevin is weighed in here. He said most businesses sell for 3 to 4 times discretionary cash flow over the last 3 years. But we've been in a seller's market for the last year, and businesses are often selling for over the list price. And the lenders are giving somewhat of a pass on 2020 in light of Corona's impact, the COVID's impact. So thank you for weighing in on that. Appreciate that, Kevin. This one, again, whether you're planning on exiting or you're transitioning or you just want to have more fun, and I do say that on purpose, not because I'm a clown, but it is because business should be fun, and it can be fun. I've been in it when it's not fun, when I, even as an owner, may not have been looking forward to it as much because we were in growth pains and too many roads were still leading to me at that point or whatever. But the question is, what are you doing to grow? Do you have, and we see this a lot, man. I mean, salespeople, if you really want to screw things up, keep monkeying with a salesperson's compensation plan, especially when they start making more than you as the owner. That's a great way to have them leave and have your value go down. I've seen it way too many times. It's just uncanny. And typically those CEOs were not ever in the sales role, so they just kind of take it for granted. But do you have compensation plans that are in place? Do you have a marketing plan? Again, I'm looking at it from when we were in private equity. We were looking for systems and processes and things to be buttoned up to where if that team exited, or especially the CEO exited, can this thing continue to move along well? And are acquisitions part of the growth strategy, or are they not? What can you continue to just grow it organically? What are those strategies? Jack, you want to weigh in on this one?
Yeah, I want to add and actually a fourth one too, which is it's subjective, not objective, because it's immeasurable but invaluable, which is culture. Mm-hmm. And so when you mention compensation plans, a lot of owners are like, well, surely that person is not going to leave me because they've been with us for 15 years and I've trained them, and they were a little baby salesperson when I got them, and now they're all mature and they know everybody in Charlotte. So that is so important. And there are companies, and we have clients, and I just know people that are not clients, but that are business owners, some of them friends, that are, well, you know what, take it or leave it. This is what we do. And they get great pay, great benefits. And if they don't want it, then we can pick somebody else, or someone else there's 5 people that will fill that slot. Not so much in these, depending on the industry, not so much these days. So, we have well, I won't get into all of that because there's, then you get into, well, there's a subsidy for unemployment and all this stuff. But anyway, so culture, I think, is very important to provide non-monetary compensation. You allow people to have, leave the office if they need to, that kind of thing. And so that is a key component. But yeah, getting back to the objective stuff as far as compensation plans, what skin in the game do they have? In most cases, I think cash is king, and people want money. Even though if you make them an owner, then they might be able to, pay capital gains versus being ordinary income. For me personally, and for my colleagues in our corporate law group here, you have to convince us to give someone equity, and we will push back on you, because this happens all the time too, which is, and I have these conversations, which is, what the F do you mean that I have to pay him that kind of money to buy him, or a sale that she has 10% of the business? I have to pay her what? And it's because that person has 10% of the business, right? And it was like, oh, well, key employee, 10% was nothing back then. And we've given that person all kinds of awesome compensation, company car. And I've given you this picture of this person before in past webinars, right? So great compensation, great bonuses, great perks, great packages, health, family insurance paid for, company car, gas unlimited, okay? They've gone to Vegas every year on company trips, right? So all those things. And then I got to pay them this 10% of this multi-million-dollar sale purchase. So, please be careful about that. I would rather you pay cash for incentives than giving. Now, having said that, if you don't have the cash, then you may want to, deal with it in equity. If you want someone to really have skin in the game, then maybe, it's basically you're paying them for performance. So if you give like a general manager 5% interest, then, the operating agreement should be very clear what they can and cannot do, that really you're giving them 5% interest as a gift, and they don't get to say anything about anything. And so very careful with the operating agreement when you draft that, or the shareholders agreement. So, and then when you get into, the marketing plan and things like that, it's just, some people go by the seat of their pants and are like, okay, well, you know what, I'll go to this Chamber of Commerce meeting, I'll do this, I'll do that. But, to have a plan moving forward. So all those points. And then as far as strategy, acquisitions, franchise, joint ventures, all kinds of options, and they all have pros and cons. And so it's just a matter of personal preference, but also what is the objective at the end of the day? Are you okay with having joint venture partners that have certain abilities, so long as you don't cross into the franchise world and become an inadvertent franchisor? And acquisitions, is it strategic? Is it something that you, as part of your manufacturing process or part of your sales process, that it would be beneficial to have that in-house? Or is it, something that is supplemental to the product that you want to be able to offer in-house and put your label on it, kind of thing? So lots of considerations, but you need to be active in that aspect and not just say, well, if an opportunity comes, an opportunity comes, because they may come, you not even realize it, because you're not doing marketing, you're not doing business development, you're not out there to find those opportunities, and they may not just fall into your lap.
I'm really glad that you mentioned culture, because that's like this massive passion of mine. And the whole thing on acquisitions, if you're looking at doing acquisitions and roll-ups as part of your strategy to build value, cultural compatibility is the number one thing that I've seen, or incompatibility, that either makes the deal good or blows it up. And I had the opportunity to work with the Germans and the Detroit guys on Daimler Chrysler. It's a case study in Harvard Business. And I remember thinking in 2001 and 2002, when I was working with them on their North American brand strategy on the launch of their Sprinter van, they could not have it badged Mercedes on the outside, even though you open up the hood and it's a Mercedes-Benz TriStar logo on the engine at the time. And now they've changed that. But at the time, they needed to know what their brand strategy was. And I remember thinking, gosh, man, you know, the Germans so precise and everything. And then the Detroit guys, it was like, you know, cost down, cost down, cost down. And I'm like, this is like oil and water. How? And I mean, they were nice people, but the cultures were so different. And I remember thinking, well, I guess everything I believe about cultural compatibility is just thrown out the door when they're so big, you just slam them together and all of a sudden they fuse. Well, guess what? 34 billion was blown up 5 years after I finished with those guys. And it's a colossal, you know, textbook example of, you know, there's real money that is affected with culture. So anyway, I thought that was interesting. And then Kevin just weighed in on this too. He said, anything that the owners can do to drive recurring revenues, like HVAC guys, where they do monthly service agreements, and diversify customer base will help increase your selling price. Ideally, if your largest customer is, well, it should not comprise more than 25 or 30% of the revenues. We had that example with, and I'll leave them to be unnamed, but it's a big company that had tremendous amount of concentration risk that we had put money in because we really believed in the management team and the CEO and what they were doing. But Home Depot was a huge piece of their business. We were very concerned about that, and we were trying to help them diversify. Well, the cool thing is once they made it through the rocks of 2009, 2010, et cetera, a few years ago, they sold for a lot of money. And I think it was 10 figures. 9 figures at least. Yeah, it was 9 figures. But they sold to Home Depot. So it was a massive strategic move, and they ended up doing well. But that was a huge concern of ours on the front end. So thanks for weighing in on that. And I know John can verify this, but you know, the finance function is really, really critical. That's another one of those things that we were looking at in the private equity. And I am not a finance guy, but a coaching client of mine a few years ago, it was taking them 3.5 months to close the monthly books. 3.5 months. Well, that's a problem. Even a podunk guy like me can figure that out. And so I'm like, you need a CFO, and they were probably 24, 25 million at the time, top line. And they thought that, you know, some leadership development could solve the problem with the finance person. I'm like, no way, you know, they're in over their head. And that's exactly right. So they got a good CFO, got it down to where they were closing it in 5 to 7 days. Well, that's exactly where you want to be. But one of the things that we have seen without exception, pretty much, and John, you can like give me a shout out on this, but everybody thinks their financials are clean, and rarely are they. But the more you have, you know, things balancing and tied up to where it's nice and neat, that's what an owner or a buyer wants to see. And what's interesting is this coaching client, you know, now they're probably close to 90 million. 3 years later, a strategic person or big entity came in, wanted to buy a piece of them, have a minority interest. Well, I can guarantee you there's no way they would have gotten the multiples that they did had they still had their books in such a shambles where it was taking 3.5 months to close the monthly books. I can guarantee you that. So, you know,
Gary,
things like, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll be happy to chime in. If you'll just flip back to that question 5 real quick, and then I'll flow into question 6. So question 5, the last one was if you're growing through acquisitions. And I think the two most important things to think about are how much are you willing to pay and what are you buying? So how much are you willing to pay is going to be, theoretically, it's going to be after-tax discretionary cash flows, the present value of those, right? But it could be a strategic. It could be, your biggest competitor in the market, and then you're going to expect to pay a higher price, right? So what is the expected price given whether it's a strategic sell or an insider sell? Those all have a difference, an impact on what the price is going to be. And then what are you buying? Are you buying the stock or the membership interest of the company, or are you buying the assets of the company? And those have drastically different results on what happens at the end of the day. Obviously, if you're going to run an operating business, you want to purchase the assets of the corporation so that you can appreciate them. But you don't want to buy this. And if you're the buyer, you don't want to buy the stock because you don't want to assume the liabilities that may come along with that stock. So those are all things that you need to be talking to your advisors about. And the other thing I'll add is to that is, so what are you going to pay for it and what are you buying? Well, I've lost my chain of thought.
No worries.
Thanks,
I'm
Gary.
glad I'm not the only one.
Well, let's roll on forward to the next question, and we'll jump in. And hopefully, I'll circle back around.
All right, cool. And just a shout out back to on the chat from Joe. A fractional CFO was one of our better investments besides BGW. Oh, I love that. But that is so true. If you can't afford a big rock star CFO, and not everybody can, good fractional CFOs, and there are good ones. Robert Mayette is on here. He's a fractional CFO for a couple of our clients. He's very buttoned up, but you need to have somebody that's good and also has good chemistry with the owner. I mean, that's really, really critical, and not everybody jives in that way. So, if somebody's looking and they want some intros, let us know. We'll be happy to help out on that as well. So anyway, again,
sorry to interrupt, but it came to me. Pay attention to the purchase price allocation when you buy a company or sell your company. The buyer and the seller need to agree on that price divvied up amongst the assets of the company, and then the rest being goodwill, which is subject to which you get long-term capital gains rates on generally. So don't just focus on the price, focus on how the price is allocated, and then also focus on the term. So if you don't want to be the bank, because we've all seen many times when a purchase is made and then that business fails, right? So you don't want to be the bank. And so you may be willing to take a slightly lower price with outside financing, right? You're going to want a premium if you're going to finance it yourself. So purchase price allocation, I can't stress that enough. All right, back to you, Gary.
All right, good stuff. And the other thing that we looked for was how strong was the management team, and again, you better have somebody that's strong on the finances. And I don't think that there's a big discount. Like if you're a fractional CFO, I've seen companies as big as 40 or 50 million that are still operating with a fractional CFO, and they're doing quite well. Again, it depends on who it is. An acquirer just wants to know, is the stuff buttoned up or is it in a shambles? And boy, do we have some horror stories of stuff that we've seen come across, from other firms that, again, their stuff, everybody thinks that their stuff's clean and rarely is it.
Gary, and I'll chime in one more time. I hear this from clients all the time. Well, I'm going to have to show some profits at some time and pay some taxes if I'm going to get that price I want for the company. And that, there are very good reasons for there being a difference between taxable income and book income. And your financial statement should present to the buyer the true financial position of the company. which doesn't necessarily mean you need to pay the maximum tax all along the way. So any savvy buyer, and Viking, you guys could chime in to hear, they're going to know what's excessive owner compensation. They're going to know that those trips to Vegas were really part educational and part fun. They're going to add back all those things. So they're going to know what your value is anyway. So that's the piece I wanted to add there.
Yeah, the other thing that I'll add into this, which is another thing that I see fractionalized too much and fractured, where CEO has their insurance guy, they have their financial planner guy, they have their attorney guy, they have their CPA, but rarely do they come together as the team. And until it's too late, there was an issue or whatever. But I'd say if you are not helping get those folks together so that they're coordinating, because again, if it's all in your mind, that's not a great plan. It's not communicated. So let's see what came in on the chat. John is now channeling Adam. Woo, yeah. So just so you know, Joe, and for anybody else, John was an early employee with Adam, and Adam, when he introduced me back to John had been running his own firm and was looking to be part of a bigger team again. Adam said, Gary, believe me, I was the dumbest person in the room. John was one of the smartest people in the room. And I'm like, yeah, right. Well, I've seen John in action, and I would say these guys have, similar horsepower. So, so anyway, here's one other thing on this thing. I'm amazed as well. When you're assessing accountability with respect to profitability, when's the last time you tiered your customers? And when's the last time you dove deep into the profitability of each of those customers? Case in point, coaching client of mine had concentration risk with one customer in particular, and I think they were about 25% of their top line. Brought a CFO in that is just rocking the house for them, has been with them for now 3 years. And they went in and they found that their most profitable, or their number one customer, they were taping $35 to every invoice. They were losing $35 on every invoice. And this is a big, a publicly traded company that was their customer. And like, well, you guys have got to muster up the courage, and you can tell them to take a hike or take a price increase, because as soon as if they the worst thing that happens is they walk, guess what? You just gave yourself a bottom line raise. Okay, so you're not going to have as many people working maybe, but you've given yourself a raise. Well, nonetheless, they had the courage based with data, and they went back and they adjusted prices with their key customers, and their margins are really good, and they're fair. They're fair for everybody. So that's an important thing. Then what do you do when you have underperformance? Again, it's, people want to know whether they're winning or losing. What are the metrics, and what are you doing to do it? And again, like, this can be overwhelming if you look at all of this stuff. Like, hey, all I'm going to say is just pick one thing and know, all right, all of these things are important, but start with one and just start incrementally moving. Anything that you would add to that, Jack?
Yeah, and so it happens all the time, which is, we've done it before, we've done it for a long period of time, so we're going to continue to do it. And there's just not an analysis as to profitability. There's not an analysis as to, do the customers really want it? Because a lot of times they're just doing it because you're making them do it. And a stupid example is, okay, the ability to process, to submit a purchase order via facsimile versus through some electronic means that you can automatically go into and process the order, et cetera. So are you going to use the old technology or new technology? And I saw this and I was like, what's up with the fax machine? And like, well, some of our customers still use it. I'm like, okay, is it because you have it available, or is it because they really want to do it? If you were to push them into, and even if you were to educate them, the old school, that hold on to the old school way of doing things, if you educate them and make them comfortable with the new wave of things on how to do things, then they will comply, or they will be accepting, and they will join in. And then you can move away from that. A product line that, you know, that maybe you're not selling a whole lot of, but one of your first customers kind of likes it. Okay, well, let's put a stash away for that client and tell them, okay, we have probably a 1-year supply of this stuff, but we have an alternative product for you that's even better. Why don't you try this out? Send them some free samples. So all kinds of things that you can do, but just we become stuck in that rut. And I don't even want to say it's a rut. It's just routine. It's customary. It's comfortable. And we just need to challenge ourselves into, okay, is this really, is there a better way of doing something, or is there something we shouldn't be doing because we're doing it for the wrong reasons? We want to be loyal. We want to make everyone happy, but sometimes we have to inflict a little bit of pain with helping them put the Band-Aid on, and then they're like happy, and they're like, okay, why didn't you tell me about this before? Is usually the reaction. That, okay, oh my gosh, and now we're more profitable because I don't have that person using the fax machine. They're putting it in and it's done, you know. So again, just a kind of a bizarre example, but a real life example of, you know, knowing, and like Gary said, don't wig out. It's a lot of things to think about. So, you know, take it piece by piece. Maybe, you know, for this quarter, you focus on products. Next quarter, you focus on personnel. I mentioned this last week, I think it was last week, where a lot of times the wrong person is in the wrong job. And a lot of times you have an owner who started the business by being the salesperson, is the extrovert, is the guy out there slapping the back and on golf course and doing deals. And then they get benched because they feel like they have to be in the office doing the back office stuff. They hire somebody to go out there and do a job worse than or not as good as they. And so we say, okay, you go out there, you hire someone to do this office stuff, and guess what? The person that you hire is going to be less expensive than you. Or a lot of times they have 3 people doing the job where it should be 2 or 1, because they feel like, okay, well, you know, I need 3 people to do the job that I would do if I were in that position, like sales. So maybe you don't need 3 salespeople. Maybe you need 1 extra plus the owner. So again, I know we're running late, so I don't want to belabor it, but very important to do self-assessments. Tangent to that, ask your employees. I mean, walk around the office, walk around the warehouse. A lot of times it's easy to manage like this. You need to be right in the mix of things, because you're going to hear things, and that you also build the trust of your people, that they can come to you, and be careful. Don't be retaliatory, you know, and be accepting. And if it's something that you can't do, you can't do. Just say, look, we appreciate it, but we can't do this or that. We can't make this change for whatever reason. Kind of like stuff that happens here in this firm. It's like, well, that's a great idea, but we can't do that. And let me tell you why we can't do it. It's not gonna make you happy, but it's just, we can't do it. And so just think about those things. Get in the trenches with your crews.
Yes, and amen to that. So Jack is aptly wearing the Seafoam green shirt because he's going to be in Seafoam next week, hopefully avoiding the sharks to keep his wife and children happy, but also hopefully doing some adventures that will make him and his children come alive and not give his wife a panic attack. So we will miss you next week. It won't be the same without you, but we will carry on. Adam will be back, Lord willing. I just talked to him. He was coherent after the jet lag and getting in the middle of the night. And so, John, thank you for being on here. You did a great job. I appreciate that very much. And for anybody that came on late or had to, well, if you had to jump off early, you aren't listening to this, but we will put this up on the BGW YouTube channel today, BGW CPA YouTube channel. Let's see here. Oh, hey, good job. Thank you, Kevin, for being on here. Really appreciate that. And you guys have a wonderful day and a great rest of the week.
Thank
Sign
you,
off.
guys. Thank you, John.
All right, bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody. Enjoyed it.